Welcome to The Network, a success podcast for nurse and healthcare consultants to learn the strategies and tactics to launch and grow a profitable consulting firm. And now for your host, Elle Pearson.
Hello and welcome to episode 9 of The Network. I'm your host, Elle, and I am so excited to welcome you back to another episode where we help healthcare professionals learn the strategies to launch and grow a profitable consulting firm. In today's episode, I'm going to be introducing you to Dr. Deborah Vincent, who is a curriculum and accreditation nurse consultant. Dr. Vincent likes to go by Debbie, so we're going to call her Debbie for today's episode. And she is an expert online teacher and a Quality Matters peer reviewer. She provides consultations on designing online courses and has developed both master's and doctoral level courses for online and web enhanced delivery. Debbie has consulted on advanced practice nursing curriculum development, both locally and internationally, and she is someone who you need to know. She shares a lot of great information on today's episode, so if you are in the world of academia, this is an episode you definitely don't want to miss out on. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to The Network. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks, Elle, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you.
Absolutely. Debbie, I'm so excited to have you on because there are a lot of nurses who are very much interested in your particular nurse consulting specialty. So, Debbie, for those who've never met you before, tell us a little bit about yourself and the consulting specialty that you work in.
Okay. Well, I am a PhD prepared nurse. I am an adult nurse practitioner and have been for 40 years. And I have taught in academia for more than 15 years, though now I am retired and focus on consulting. Yes. So I taught in the graduate programs, MSN, DNP, and PhD programs. And mostly I taught online. So more than 15 years of online. And I was a Quality Matters reviewer until I retired. And you have to be actively teaching to stay on that. I'm also a CCNE reviewer and a team leader, and I've been doing that for quite a few years. And then let me think. So when I taught NP clinical courses, health policy, and translational research.
Yeah, that's a lot of great experience that you have to bring to the table. So with all of that experience, tell me a little bit about what you do now as a consultant.
Okay. Well, really what I do has been founded in what I did. So in teaching for so many years, I developed expertise in curriculum development and revision and program outcomes, things that in academia you're always doing, tweaking, playing with, changing when standards change, that sort of thing. And what I didn't mention is I also did some research. And so based on that, I have a lot of experience in evaluation methods, which is one of my loves. And if you're going to develop a nursing program or you're going to revise a nursing program, you need to have an evaluation plan in place. And actually, I think you need it from day one and figure out what your outcomes are. How are you going to know if your program is effective? And then how are you going to measure it? So I bring that to what I do now. And what I do is I work with mostly nursing schools, though I do some individual mentoring with some with students and some with faculty who want a specific area or want to learn about something. But mostly it's nursing schools and the leadership. And they're doing usually one of two things. Either they're developing a program, usually a DNP program from scratch, and they have to go through the entire process. And most states require you to go through it'll vary, the name will vary depending on the state, but their Board of Higher Education. Now, this is different than the nursing board, but this is to approve a new program. And so they look at a lot of different things when they do it. I don't get involved with the needs assessment. Usually, I don't do that, but they have to present a curriculum. And so that's where I help people. And then the other thing is they have a program and for whatever reason, they want to revise it. So their outcomes weren't what they wanted, or standards have changed, or, maybe they decided these days, a lot of people are looking at concept-based curriculums. So we help people with that. And then the other big area of focus is I get calls or I get emails saying, oh my gosh, CCNE or ASIN are coming and we need help preparing our self-study, and we don't know what to expect, or we just don't have the time. Faculty are busy. So I work with clients to get ready for accreditation visits. It's a stressful process for them.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel oftentimes as consultants, a lot of times, organizations will reach out to us when they're in crisis mode. So it sounds like you have that same experience where, they reach out to you when it's an urgent matter and they don't have anyone on their staff or faculty to address, getting prepared for accreditation. So do you find that to be true also when your practice? Do they call you when they're in a crisis mode?
Yes, very frequently. It's sort of the rare experience and the pleasure experience when somebody is thinking, CCNE is coming in about a year and a half, we should start working on it, because that makes the process, when you have that kind of time, it's an iterative process as you write, unless you write very well. And most of us, even if we write well, it improves with revision.
Yes.
But so if you have that kind of time, it's wonderful. But I often get CCNE is coming in 6 months. We have not a word written, and we don't know where all of our data are. So, and we're not sure what we need. So
that's a job.
Stressful for them. Yeah.
Wow. So how do you, in a situation like that, when you have an organization who's in crisis mode, they need help right away, what's your process for going into that organization? I know earlier you mentioned, assessing what they have in place, what they don't, but kind of walk me through, if an organization calls you, what's the next step that you take following that call?
Well, usually there's sort of two different ways. One is if it's a curriculum revision, that's usually not ever a crisis, and there's plenty of time to work on it. But so I like to start with a phone call and try to understand what the client's needs are, what they hope to accomplish, and in what time frame, and then talk to them about whether that time frame is realistic. Usually, like with an accreditation visit, you have a date. They're coming October 1st or whatever, and you can work backwards. So if they're coming October 1st, your self-study has to be uploaded 6 weeks in advance. So that's the drop dead date, basically. Everything has to be ready for the self-study, but you still have time to work on the resource room and get people prepared and that kind of thing. So I usually work backwards with them and say, let's say you have 6 months, and we're probably, if you have not a word written, we're probably going to need 3 or 4 versions, 3 or 4 revisions, because that's been my experience. So you need to start writing like right this minute, and just write down whatever you have. And so based on the phone call, what I do is I put together a proposal, and which I like to use as a contract, because I have all the standard contract language in there. And that's one thing I would say to people who are thinking about consulting. It's best if they will accept your contract, especially if you've had a lawyer look at some of the indemnity language and whatnot, because often that can be very tricky. Some people write things like, I own everything and I have responsibility for nothing. And you, the consultant, own nothing and have responsibility for everything. And obviously I'm exaggerating, but you need to be careful about that kind of language. And then, so I try to be very transparent and very concrete about, so this project is due by X date, and then working back, you need to have the final revision to me by X date. I will have 2 weeks to turn it around and provide you with comments, and work all the way back to whatever day it is that we're getting started.
Yes. And I like that you do that, Debbie, because you're laying out the expectations at that time.
Right.
So there's question or no doubt exactly what you're bringing to the table and what they're supposed to also, provide you with as well. So I think that's fantastic.
In fact, I put that in the proposal or the contract. So I always outline the deliverables, and that's something I want them to look at then, and we should agree on. And before they sign things, I mean, they should really understand that this is what they're getting. But then I also outline their what they have to do for the contract. So one of the things is that they have to respond to my questions or comments within 2 weeks.
Okay.
Because if they have a 6-month deadline and I don't hear from them for 3 months, we can't meet that deadline.
Absolutely. Okay. So once you have all of those guidelines, expectations kind of laid out, you have the contract, they've gotten in contact with you, what's your next step after that?
Well, it depends on the project, but let's just stick with accreditation. So I usually ask them to send me something, send me a draft, whatever you have, as rough as it is, because the accreditation have these standards. So what you have to put in each section. And I'm more familiar with CCNE. So there are 4 standards and there are, 7 or 8 elements under each. It varies a little bit with the standard, but what has to be in there. And so I start reading based on what I would expect to see in each section. And depending on how rough it is or how well fleshed out it is, I will then make a lot of comments like I would expect to see, for example, 3 years of a budget in this section. And you don't have to go into great detail, but you should say, here's your revenue, where the sources of the revenue are. Here are your expenses, sort of in general categories. Because what I'm looking for as a reviewer is, do you have enough resources to run your program? So I need enough information for that. And I think that's often something I see left out. And then sometimes I actually just write sections based on what my understanding of what they've written and what they've told me. And then I send it back to them. And I usually will sometimes I use a red line, sometimes I don't, because it gets confusing sometimes. Yeah. And I'll highlight, this is what I've written. And then I'll have a lot of comments. For instance, I'm really not clear on how you got from step A to step C. Yes. You know this and you know what B is, but I, as the reader, have no clue. So can you expand on this? Can you give me an example of how you changed the program based on feedback, for example? So I do a lot of that, and the first draft takes a lot of time. But the final draft should probably take me, 4 or 5 hours to read, as opposed to what the very first draft takes.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
It sounds very time consuming. My question to you is, Debbie, also, do the guidelines and criteria, are they different by state, or are they all the same, like the same deadlines, the same requirements for each university?
For the accreditation, they vary by accrediting body. So CCNE is the same across all 50 states, and also they go to Puerto Rico. And ASIN is the same. So the standards don't change. Some states, when they have an accreditation visit, the State Board of Nursing will also come in. So obviously, in that case, their standards vary by state. No, it doesn't vary. If you're developing a program or you're going to get a program approved, they're pretty similar across states, but there are some specifics to each state that you have to fill in.
Okay. Another question for you, Debbie. A lot of nurses are interested in knowing, once you've assessed what's in place, what's not, you've provided them with recommendations, how do you then measure your results? Of course, if it's accreditation, they would pass or not. But are there anything else specifically that you do for that organization to go back, to touch base with them, to keep that relationship open and to continue to provide them with further guidance?
I would love to do that. That hasn't happened. And one of the reasons is that nursing schools have very tight budgets. And also there's a lot of turnover. So you work with somebody and 3 years later, that person isn't there anymore. So it hasn't, I think that would be the ideal, to come in and say, we set up this curriculum and we have all these outcomes and you're getting your data. And I'd love to know if you're meeting your data, but that's really something they don't want to pay for. They want to do it in-house, and maybe for other reasons too. Yes. But unless they get into trouble, they don't usually reach out again. At least at this point, I haven't had that.
Okay. Yeah. I find that, at least in my practice, when they call me in crisis mode, I've tried to negotiate terms with them to keep them on a retainer so they, won't call me every few months when they definitely need my help. So yeah, I wish there was a way where nursing schools were more cognizant of the fact that they need you to be present and around, even if it's to call you or be available to ask questions so they won't, find themselves in a hole and, trying to find the closest expert again to come back and fix everything. I
normally respond to emails and phone calls. If somebody was a client 2 years ago and now they have a question about something, I just respond to that. It's usually, but they have a lot of experts on their staff. So our business is a little bit different than yours. And they have their experts on staff. And usually what happens is, because the teaching loads, people just don't have the time to do this kind of thing. But if they set up a good evaluation plan, whether it's for CCNE or ASIN, or to develop a program or revise a program, if they're working that plan, they should be able to do it themselves. Maybe they'll have a question or two, but not necessarily a big project. I would hope.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Now, Debbie, how do you determine your rates? If an organization wants to work with you, how do you go from assessing their needs to saying, okay, this is the fee I'm going to charge to work on this project? What are the factors that you consider when you send them an invoice for your services?
Well, I charge $150 an hour. And so the only other rate I do is a fixed price if somebody has a self-study that's already written and they want a fresh pair of eyes to review it and comment before they upload it, which I would suggest, because there's nothing more off-putting, I think, as a reviewer than the very first sentence or first paragraph is grammatically incorrect. And just little things like that. You know, if you're reading a student's paper and the first sentence is, you can't understand it, or it's grammatically incorrect, it sets the tone for your reading the rest of it. The rest of it could be fine, but you've already got this sort of bias. So I think it's helpful to organizations to have somebody, whether they pay for it or they have someone else do it, read their final self-study before it goes up. So for that, I charge a flat rate or a fixed fee. And I came about those fees based on talking to other people who did this. So it's $1,200. And that's based on, it takes me roughly 8 to 12 hours to read a self-study and the appendices, depending on how well written it is. So that's kind of how I came up with that. And then for the rest of it, it's $150 an hour. And based on years of experience and having done this quite a bit now, I know how long it's going to take me, like I said, to read a very rough draft versus a final draft. If I'm developing the evaluation program, the plan for them. And I always build in consultation time on a monthly basis too. And something we discuss. So do you want to talk to me or email me once a week, once a month? You know, what would you like? And I build that in. And then the other thing that's sort of in between the fixed and the hourly is some people want me to come and do a mock site visit. So we go through things just like if I was CCNA coming. And that's really helpful, particularly if you've got a lot of new faculty who haven't been through it before, or if you have new administrators. So you have a new provost, or, you know, smaller schools, the provost maybe didn't go through an accreditation visit. Bigger schools, they go through them like every 6 months with different organizations. But that can be helpful. And that I charge a daily rate. So I figure I work 10 hours a day, $150 an hour. I charge $1,500 for if I'm on site, plus travel time. So that's kind of how I came up with it. And people, when I put together a proposal, you know, sometimes they say, well, put in the site visit and we think that's great. But then they get it and they look at the price and they say, well, gee, we'd love to do this, but we can't afford it. So that would be one thing I would say, okay, let's take that out and go forward and see what happens.
So negotiation is always in the works.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
And all the details of your rates, you lay that out in your contract, correct?
Yes, I do. I have it, you know, where it says what I charge per hour. And then I put in a table, which is what the deliverables are. And sometimes the steps, it depends on how many steps. I'd like to be clear on that. So how many steps would be involved, and then how many hours, I think, and I use a minimum and a maximum hours. So if it's really well written, maybe it'll take me an hour standard to read. If it's poorly written, maybe it takes me 5 hours, you know. So I have this range, and then the cost varies based on the range of hours, and that's all laid out in a table so they can see it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That sounds about the same with my process too. I lay everything out in great detail in the very beginning of the relationship before we move forward with business, just so we know all of the details of, again, expectations, how much you're going to be charged, et cetera. So we definitely have something in common there.
Right.
Yes. Debbie, I think you have done a fantastic job of leveraging all of your years of experience and faculty, and just to be able to just monetize your knowledge. So I appreciate you coming on to the podcast and sharing your expertise. If there was anyone who wanted to go into curriculum redesign and do what you're doing today, could you provide a tip or piece of advice for any nurses that wanted to kind of go in that same area as you?
You know, if you're already in academia, so you're doing it, keep your files. That would
Yes.
be, because you don't want to invent everything from scratch. You have a lot of this experience. So if you have syllabi that you can build on or revise, that's easier than writing it from a blank piece of paper. And keep articles. We had talked about, I don't really have a book that I've used, but I go to the library all the time, well, online library, and I'm always reading things about curriculum development or revision. What's new this year? What are people doing? And I stay active in my professional organizations, and so for me, I go to the National Organization of Nurse Practitioner Faculty meetings. So I haven't been there in a year or so, but I am a member, and I read their website and, what's happening in the DNP world and that sort of thing. So you have to stay current.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you. You have to be able to know what's going on and what's trending to be able to provide that good sound advice and guidance for any clients that you serve.
Right.
So I agree. Well, Debbie, I've enjoyed talking to you today, and I look forward to many more conversations. And absolutely, I'm excited that you were on the podcast today. Debbie, if there's anyone who wanted to stay connected to you or reach out to you, what's a good contact piece of information that they can reach you by? What's a good platform?
I think the best way to reach me is through LinkedIn. It shows, it has my contact information, and it shows my services. And then they could go to the website too, which is also a link on my LinkedIn page.
Okay. And tell us, what's the name of your website? How do we get to it?
Nurse Consultant Associates.
Okay. Very good. Well, Debbie, I've enjoyed you. You have a great day. Okay.
Thank you so much. This has actually been a lot of fun.
Yes. Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you found it valuable and you're ready to get started in consulting or grow your own consulting firm. Until next time, I'll chat with you in the next episode. Take care. Hold on before you go. If you need a step-by-step template to start your consulting practice, check out the nurseconsultantnetwork.com. Here you can learn about our membership academy that'll provide you with a roadmap to launch your consulting practice. Go to www.thenurseconsultantnetwork.com/join to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Network Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're ready to monetize your knowledge as a consultant, head over to thenurseconsultantnetwork.com and check out our free resources. Until next time.